And we have Johannes from Roseframework, an AI sustainability intelligence platform. Is that right?
Yeah.
Excellent, cool. How big is your tech team at the moment?
At the moment, pretty small again.
Okay.
But,
So you're more early stage, right, Stefan?
Early stage.
Yeah, and for Stefan, I think that we have like a bit of an earlier stage CTO, and we have Stefan who's actually CPO by technical fund. You were CTPO and some CPT, all the titles. That's the fund, you get all the titles, and you have a much bigger team already. So we have like a little bit different perspectives. Some is a little bit closer to the code, maybe some is a little bit more removed from the code. So let's dive into it. I'm putting the questions up here so you can see it and that they give short answers so we can go back to pizza and mingling soon. And so Stefan, one thing that I thought was very interesting to talk about with the group is at Parloa, like you come from a different background, right? Like you started actually when there was Siri and Alexa, right? So quite early, but you made a bold move to bet on LLMs very early. I'm curious because all this stuff that's happening everything is moving so fast. How to make that call? Like, what did you see that others didn't see? Because I think it's interesting to start kind of from a high level and then go into the details.
Sure, so we need to set a bit the context. So this was not about coding, but it was about customer communication. And when you look at all these bots and you ask also others, how was your experience with the bots? Oh, terrible! And everybody can tell you the trick how to get beyond the bots really quickly, and that's their accomplishment. And so what we see in these experiences is that these bots are rule-based and really simple. And we also build bots. And you can imagine when you build and you see all these conversations going on and you see all these customers fail, you are hurt. And how do you get beyond that? And you know how it's happening in the background with all these rules. And you notice, you just cannot capture a conversation with all these rules. You need some more flexibility. And that flexibility, where can it come from? AI. Now, at that time, for quite a while, there wasn't really large language models, or just simple ones like BERT, which just essentially doesn't have a lot of context, but it just creates embedding. So really simple things. What they all then did at that time was pattern recognition, but at a simpler style. And they essentially learned a sequence of certain actions, but they did not understand the semantics behind it. And with a little amount of training data you can have in one company, you cannot really generate that. So the big breakthrough was, okay, when you take the understanding of the world, because you train it with the internet essentially, now you have a different starting point. You have a starting point of a semantical and contextual understanding of what's going on, what the problem is, what the instructions are, and how you can use a certain API, for example, because you can generalize from that brief description. And at that time, when we started building an AI agent system ourselves, there was a bit before ChatGPT came out, it was when 3.5 Instruct came, and it was like, all right, you can really make them work with tools. So it's not just a completion of text, which was there before, but they can think one step around it, just like a monkey, right? They can use tools, which are few other animals can. And so this was, they are getting at a smartness where they're getting interesting. And then we started building.
Okay, yeah, cool. I think it's really interesting that, I mean, I like the monkey analogy, like it's like this simple understanding, hey, they can use tools, that's the key change, right? And then it's the key change, that the capabilities have changed. Maybe moving from that like to Johannes, like when was the moment for you that you realized that LLMs are changing how things are working?
So for me, it was very much about coding with AI, where suddenly it was GitHub Copilot. It changed how I actually wrote code. People who work with me in the past will tell you in every code review I focused on, hey, this function isn't named clearly enough, this function is not named clearly enough, this variable could use a better name. So this was always something that came natural to me to spend some time on. And with the earliest versions of Copilot, I noticed that, hey, if I spend a little more time on the function name, on the variable name, the rest is autocompleted. I have a super fast autocomplete. I am, and I used to be a huge fan of pairing amongst developers. And one thing that always worked for me was I would kind of talk through what I wanted to develop, and I had another person use the keyboard and do all the syntax. This is literally what I got from Copilot. And that was
programming?
I'm not as much as I'd want to, and AI coding assistance is a big reason for that, because for pair programming to make sense, I feel like I need to, reserve 2 entire hours, 2 full hours to get into it, explore the problem together, and then we save the AI coding tools. I have a pair programmer who is exactly where we last left off, and I have 20 minutes until the next meeting, and I can get into that. So yeah, especially, this is one of the cool things, is even on a meeting-filled day, you get to program every now and then in between, and that was impossible to imagine before.
Okay, super cool. So let's go to the kind of the topic of the day, right? Like, I think it's about giving space for playing around. Like, you can just decide you're the boss, but your team maybe does. What are experiments that you have tried out, Johannes, that have worked or haven't worked with regards to AI in your team?
Yeah, let's talk about one thing that didn't work. So, again, much more in the earlier days of Copilot, one of my engineers, he was reluctant to install it because he felt very proud of remembering the syntax, and he was like, if I now have AI do all that for me, then I'll become useless and I'll forget. And we had a 2-hour conversation, and I tried to convince him, and in the end he installed Copilot, and he was like, yeah, fine, it makes me 5% faster, I don't know. So that was a huge investment on my end that I think did not really work out. And I've been struggling. Like, do I just let people do whatever and hopefully they'll find it? What I've switched to now, and I'm doing this also, for example, with our designer, is obviously I've shared some of the things that work for me, and my co-founder shares some of the things that work for her, and then he was like, yeah, I've tried this, it didn't work. Yeah, I've made it, put my emphasis on, you've tried it, it didn't work, is not an interesting conversation to have. Unless you're asking me, what else can I try, then I can give you some ideas. But what I am excited about is what have you tried and has worked, because then I can learn from it too. And that seems to be much more fruitful, and I have people very excited about working with AI today.
So just maybe truffle up, so that means, if I get it right, people should be talking to you about the experiments they're trying that are working, or should be trying many experiments? What is the key?
I think both those things. So just today, for example, my designer shared, hey, I did this prototype with Lovable. It absolutely ignored the Figma design that I had, and it looks terrible here and here and here. But I now have this button, and it's interactive, and it shows this form, and it shows this concept that I really wanted to talk about today. And so I think you mentioned that earlier, by the way, with this whole prototyping by product managers and designers. Almost anything handed off to a developer is a communication tool. So it only really matters how well it communicates the main point that you're trying to make. And so especially here, this is a new tool in your tool belt. As a product manager, as a designer, and also as an engineer, you're communicating concepts. So you should also, I also use Vault for communicating just some rough ideas.
Might I ask? Yeah. So I think it's a really strong point to frame what to talk about. And did you see a difference of perception than of the attitude of like maybe more yes you can attitude instead of all these risks I don't make my hands up? Did that change something in your culture?
I want to say the main difference is we went from not talking about much unless I asked to people sharing proactively that, hey, this actually is an entirely new workflow that I have never thought about before. This is I know it's not quite right yet, but it's cool. There's something there. And that's fun, and I'm having these conversations more.
Maybe Stefan, like, I think your team almost doubled last year or something in engineering. It was like 90 people now, 100 maybe. What experience are you running to make AI work for you?
Well, reality is all kinds because it's such a massive shift, but change is slow. And I don't think we are at that level yet where we can really live up to that on the full scope. So we do all kinds of things. We really believe in education, moving in change, and so we have a knowledge sharing, so a technical version. We had talks there. Of course, we share all kinds of success stories in our updates channels. We had then just recently also a hackathon where we did something like the competition you see here, where everybody had the instruction to have, I think, 2 hours to build a certain API, and it was really interesting to see who won this challenge. First of all, maybe didn't succeed at that time, but those who did were the best programmers. Actually, none of the great programmers really got to that result because I guess they were stuck with the old way of working. But it was people from VoIP engineering who don't need to code so much. It was people from data analysis who got it up really quickly. That was actually the fastest by far. So it was really interesting to see who was all of a sudden fast in this new world and who was able to adapt quickly. But maybe to round this up, what other things we did, what also really worked well, was have specific examples. So one of our developers prepared maybe 8 use cases and walked through each one. So this is how you can use it for refactoring. This is how you can use it for writing a PR request. And so we just literally did this together, and that I think was the biggest leverage of reducing that barrier. This is actually how I can use it, and I'm less fear to do this. So we tried many things. Are we completely there yet? No, but one step at a time we'll get there.
I think I have a question about velocity somewhere. Let's see. Staying with you, Stefan, like, we talked about the skepticism, right? And you said also, like, we're not there yet. What are, like, the key objections that you've been maybe hearing, but also maybe you're feeling? Or, like, what are the key objections that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it goes a lot like Johannes said, it's, it doesn't do this, look here it has a fault, look here's like a problem here, and then I committed it, and then our security scan was running over it, tons of security issues, and so there's a lot of issues you see which are different than when you do it yourself. And this is on a superficial level, the concern which are raised. I think it is my interpretation after talking with all these developers is that the root cause is one level deeper. It's you've become successful, you've become that senior engineer because you write great code, right? You have gotten that job because you have succeeded that coding challenge. This is what you identify with. This is your job the entire time. Now, this is what you value and what you identify with. That's what you said before. You keep up to date with the latest coding styles and these things. And now all of a sudden AI is taking that away from you, so you of course, you feel like you're in competition with the AI, and so you need to criticize the AI. Well, it's not as good as I can be, which can be right, can be wrong, I guess it depends. They are not that bad really, but they do have some struggles. So you, instead of changing that level, because if the AI can do it, it should do it, because it's a lot faster than you are. And however, there are certain things which AI is really not that good at when you need the entire context, right? This is also where I think the tab completion really struggles. They've never read any PRD, they have no idea what the company does. They only look at that snippet of the code and now need to project what would be next. I would be terrible at that. So it's impressive how good these models are in doing so, but what they generally struggle is having that full context. So what is that user? How are these bigger flows? Like all the context, you have all these meetings, and how about the architecture? What different components do you have? What are the past decisions you've made, which is a lot of knowledge we as humans use to create a great architecture. So when you rethink that, and instead of that, it's taking away your job as developer who writes code, and instead advocating for, you are now an architect. You think bigger, you think more high level, and yes, you after you have chunked it down into small pieces, also with help of AI, but it's still you're much more in the driver's seat. And then that last tiny step of writing that code, well, that's what the AI can do. All right. So they, instead of losing your identity, you create a new identity, which is where a lot of developers also want to move to. And I think that's helping along that and helping to also talk about that emotion, which is also maybe for many developers not as easy, right? It's wrestling and emotions can be tough. That I think is the driver for change.
Okay, can I just try to summarize real quick before? So if I get it right, you're saying yes, it's an emotional topic. Engineers might feel threatened. At the same time, that leads to them criticizing. But you would see the future of the developer more moving towards this architect role.
Well summarized.
Thank you. Johannes, do you agree with that? Like, do you see the same things, or do you look at it differently?
I think some things, some observe some of the same symptoms and have some different interpretations that may add to this. So, for example, you're saying the tab completion, it hasn't read the PID, yes, but there's also plenty of developers who've not really read the PID.
That's another concern, I guess.
So, but beyond the joke, I feel like this is something to really lean into, because if you have documentation, if you have content available, you can throw it at the assistant and tell it, hey, read all of this, and then let's build this together. And now, you know, having a 30-page contextual document suddenly is viable. Something that you could never tell and expect that the engineer reads through themselves. Now the AI assistant does. And there's a second thing that I think for engineers can be quite frustrating, and that is when they try it out and they're like, yeah, I told the AI to build this. And then it went off and did an entirely different interpretation. It did what I said, but it didn't do what I meant.
Sounds like my wife.
Well, I want to say welcome to management. Like, this is what the moment you manage humans, you experience all the time. You've communicated kind of what you wanted, but also left out so much of the context. Of course, it has its own interpretation. So I think that's those are some of the constraints that we are already working with when working with humans. Both the think about how you manage a human world to code for you. You can do that with LLMs if you instruct them well on what you really want. And also if you have a lot of documentation that you kind of can't imagine a human would read, the AI can read it really, really fast. This is really cool, actually.
Okay. I think I would add one thing, like so I listened to every podcast that is there on AI coding tool in the last week, so to prepare. I think one thing that I feel also that wasn't in the presentation is that this building a plan, whether it's a PID or some other type of plan, and then executing in small steps against that plan is the de facto way of actually building with AI coding tools. But it's already, now that it's kind of out there, it's already almost obsolete, because both GPT-5 and all the other Anthropic Sonnet and so on, they're building chain of thought into their tooling more, no?
Well, they do, but it's also a different purpose. To me, the PRD is an alignment of the goal. It's what is the outcome you want to have, and at least personally, I talk a lot with it, so we have a conversation about it, and then it's writing the PRD, and so you see a summary. Is this really what I want? And then you see misconceptions.
It's a different level of
It's
plan.
a different,
yeah, it's a different level of plan. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But I think like the way this is working is you need the plan, you need to execute in small steps, and like the key thing behind it, which is interesting about like Bold, Lovable, and all these mega success stories, they all have like relatively old companies, like 3-4 years before. And the key thing that changed was Sonnet 3.5. So when Sonnet 3.5 came out, the first time was able to have like to one-shot bigger chunks of code, like moving from this autocomplete to actually having bigger chunks, like Diane's behind you, pulling up nice little admin hour. So like that hasn't been possible before. This was a key, I think, game changer at some point. And I want to add that. Yeah, Stefan, now you've done like I did the calculation. So if you put 80 engineers for 4 hours into a hackathon, it's Stefan's cost level of like, good data science, like 20,000 euros investment. So thank you for that. We're putting this into a Tekkr playbook to share it with the rest of the world. But have you seen changes in velocity in development speed already? What are you expecting to happen in the next 3-6 months on that level?
So what you see when you look at the usage of cursor, it's quite interesting. So you see generally a bit going up, but then you see that massive spike during the hackathon, and you see the day after that it's going down again. So I wouldn't say it was that magic bullet that solves everything. I think we are on a good trajectory if we say that cursor usage is a proxy for speed, which can be argued, but can be also argued against. So we're still in the process. We still need to have that impact, outcome-driven impact. So it was 2 weeks ago, I think, the hackathon. So we still need to wait for numbers to reflect that or not reflect that.
It's actually interesting that one of the important features of cursor is seeing who's using it. Right? You wouldn't expect that as like one of the things that are very interesting, but for the group of tech leaders, it's very interesting to see like is the adoption there, right? Johannes, for you?
I want to say that there's some things that really have changed. I do a lot of code reviews, being hands-on obviously, and there's other people using AI tools makes me more productive because in code reviews I never need to complain about variable names anymore. For example, they are always at a really decent level. I never have one function that just does too many things at once. Things are quite decently chunked. So I know for myself I'm more productive doing code reviews and criticizing more, I want to say, structural or conceptual issues. And also in general, the conversations that we're having are much more, and I have a lot of thoughts on that, much more about which requirements really matter, what's really going to drive user value, and discovering that together. This is more the PRD iteration that, and doing that together. I'm just noticing that is now the typical conversation that engineers have, and at least the details of how we implement it doesn't happen. That is not a question at all, basically.
So also, like, people become more the architect, higher level discussions are happening?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. They say you need conflict on the panel, so good job, Philip. Is there any mindset shift or behavior that you had to make personally when working with one of these tools? I know Stefan, you're also doing actually bunch of cursor stuff, so anything that when you're playing around with things that you're like, I have to change how I think about this, about working with this?
It's an interesting question. I guess overall, all of my work has moved to cursor. Also, not just programming, all the files I write, text I write, it's all in cursor now. I dictate a lot and we work it there. It's my Scratch platform and everything. But is it a mindset shift? I think in programming, I had a mindset shift because what I did before was mostly prototypes. And when I developed prototypes, I never wrote PRD and I never wrote any tests. I just kind of did it. And that has really changed now. So because first, you really need to align what's the goal so the AI can write what you want. And then I write a lot of tests because it's the guardrails what it should not do. So it does often change things you don't want it to change. And how do you protect that? By having tests which ensure that your behavior, which you have established already, keeps running. So always have that goals, the character where it should run to, and the guardrails where it should not change. And yeah, I never did these things in my projects before, but now it makes completely sense to me. I guess that's maybe my suggestion.
Okay, and Johannes, actually you mentioned there's like one nice thing that you also do with voice that I wanted to ask you about. What do you do?
So you already mentioned dictation. Basically, there's there's the important thing is that you have now an AI that doesn't have all the context that you do. And how do you make sure that it doesn't go crazy in all sorts of directions? First of all, the most important mindset shift for me was always think about, I'm working with someone who has their first day here today. They might be a smart engineer for whatever reason, but they have their first day. What are all the preliminary information that they need before they can touch any code? And that comes down to at least some rules, some documentation, and with that, things start to work. And then second of all, when I share things with my assistant, and I get lazy and I stop writing, then it gets crazy and does all sorts of things. So dictation is easier for me, and I can share twice as much information. And if I get, for example, to more the PID iteration, let's say, when it comes up with 10 features and 5 of them look good and 4 of them look like they need some work, if I write some feedback, I write feedback for the first 3 and then I'm like, yeah, the rest is kind of okay. If I use voice dictation, I talk about every single point where I'm like, this doesn't quite make sense yet. This isn't quite there yet. And then it doesn't go in the wrong direction, and that helps a lot.
So like a mini best practice would be to say, if you need to be more verbose, more detail, use AI dictation. What's the tool you use?
I use Super Whisper.
Stefan?
Mac Whisper
Okay.
and Flow.
Okay.
But actually also the Mac functionality, because just the latency is faster. And actually I've recently also used that one a lot. Depends a bit on use case.
Yeah, I think this is a nice little thing that, staying ahead of the curve. So we're going to close it out with audience questions.